Chapter 15. The Baby. Maudie struggled against the bitter wind to reach the house. She wearily stepped inside the front door. All was quiet. The kitchen was warm and clean, but Mother was nowhere in sight. She looked out the window and saw Lydia bringing the cows up from the pasture. Her face was nearly buried in a thick woolen scarf. Maudie debated about helping with chores, but then decided against it and began peeling potatoes for supper. She had been working for John Mullets and was tired to the bone. Presently, Lydia pushed through the kitchen door and was surprised to find Maudie at home. "So, you're at home," Lydia said cheerfully. Her lips were almost too cold to talk. "Yes," Maudie answered. "John just brought me." "But where's Mother?" "She's over at Tobe's. Mary went along." "Nettie's having the baby?" Maudie's eyebrows shot up. "Yep. Tobe came after Mother this morning already, but we haven't heard anything yet. Probably won't until this evening." "Probably not." Maudie turned back to the dry sink to finish peeling the potatoes, but Lydia stopped her. "Why don't you come and help us with the milking?" "I'd better stay inside where it's warm," Maudie answered ruefully. "Humph!" Lydia snorted. "Those dishwater hands of yours could use some toughening up. Come on. I have to do the chores all by myself tonight, and it would go so much faster if you helped." "Well, let me finish these potatoes, and then I'll come out," Maudie replied. It had been a long time since she helped with the chores at home, and it would be fun to milk with Lydia again. Not that she didn't do her share of milking. At most of the places where she worked, she helped with both the barn chores and the housework. While Maudie and Lydia were milking, they exchanged bits of news and other items of interest, but neither of them mentioned what was heavy on their minds, Nettie and her baby. They hoped everything would go all right and the baby would be healthy. Many, many babies and their mothers died on the prairie, with no doctors to assist them, and only mothers and neighbor women for midwives. Not only did many women die here in New Mexico, but in other places as well. Several months earlier, Nettie had received a letter from her family informing her of her mother Katie's death. It had been a terrible shock, and all the letter stated was that she had died of dropsy. Because Nettie didn't say much about it, there were many unanswered questions in Maudie's mind. Mother often helped with birthings and other illnesses, and usually Maudie didn't pay much attention to them. But because Nettie was Tobe's wife and a member of the family, and in the shadow of Katie's death, the danger seemed greater. It was well past sundown when they heard a wagon approach and knew that Tobe and Mother were returning. Father anxiously opened the door to help Mother in, his eyes searching her face for clues to the events of the day. She was smiling as she ascended the steps in the chilly wind. "What'd she have?" Lydia blurted out. "A girl," Mother replied, setting her satchel of birthing supplies on the table. "Everything went okay?" Father asked. "Oh, yes. Nettie and the baby are both doing real good. I left Mary there to help out, though. John and Chris can get into anything." "I'll bet Nettie's tickled pink to have a girl after two lively boys," Maudie said. "Guess what they named her?" Mother said, smiling from ear to ear. "Mary," Lydia guessed. That was Mother's name as well as Sister Mary's. "Nope. Probably Katie, after Nettie's mom," Maudie said. "Nope." "Then tell us," Lydia probed. "It's Maudie." Maudie was speechless. "What a surprise!" "Maudie?" she asked. "Yes, Maudie," Mother smiled. Maudie could hardly believe it. Now she couldn't wait to see the baby. Maybe tomorrow she could make a little dress with the scraps she had left from her new blue one, and maybe on Sunday they could take it over and see her little namesake. That night Maudie went to bed feeling light and happy and thinking how special it was to have a brand new niece named after her. Sunday dawned clear but cold. It was January, and the prairie was locked in winter's icy grip. Icicles hung from the edges of the roof, some as thick as Mattie's wrist. Thin ones, dainty and fragile, necklaced of prairie, twinkling on miles and miles of barbed wire fences. No church services would be held because of the cold, so Maddie, Giddle, and Lydia asked Father if they could hitch Nellie to the buggy and visit Tobe's. Without a moment's hesitation, he consented, and they were off to get their wraps. Father wasn't as concerned about cold weather as some people were. He always said it's the people who bundle up tightly and smother themselves in coats and scarves who get sick. Sometimes Maddie almost believed him. She remembered how he had let Giddle go to school when he was only about 4 years old and it was snowing and blowing terribly. Mother wouldn't have let him go if Father hadn't said that he could, and Giddle did not get sick from it either. In fact, he never missed a day that entire school year, so the teacher had given him a pearl-handled pocket knife on the last day of school. Still, Maddie and Lydia put on several layers of garments and thick, warm coats. Then they wrapped woolen scarves around their necks and faces. The wind could cut you to the bone if you weren't careful. Some people told of their noses freezing because they didn't keep them covered. It was so cold today that it seemed twice as far as the 3 miles it actually was. They tied Nellie in the barn, covered her with a blanket, then hurried to the house. With a rapid knock, they burst through the doorway. "Anybody home?" they called. Tobe, who had been sleeping beside the stove, jumped up in surprise. "Oh, it's you," he mumbled. "Sleepyhead," Lydia teased. "Hey, come in." Mary arose from the table where she had been reading to John and Chris. "We have baby." John slid off the chair where he had been sitting and hurried over to Maddie, hugging her legs and making it impossible for her to get her coat off. "We have baby," he repeated. "You do?" Maddie knelt and put her arm around his thin shoulders. He nodded his head and smiled. "Yep, we sure do," Chris agreed. "And she has your name." He pointed toward Maddie. "Isn't that nice?" she smiled. Mary went to the bedroom and soon returned with the baby. Maddie took the soft, cotton-wrapped bundle in her arms and held her reverently. She didn't resemble the older children, but looked a little more like Nettie. Lydia told Maddie to hurry, finish holding the baby so she could have her turn. Tobe moved his chair closer to Giddle and wanted to hear the news from home. Chris and John tried to go into the bedroom to talk to their mother, but Mary gently took them aside and quieted them. The afternoon passed swiftly and pleasantly. When it was time for the young people to leave, Mary saw another buggy across the prairie. Soon they recognized Blaze, Jake's horse. Likely he had Ida along. They were almost inseparable anymore, and the family expected them to announce their wedding soon. When Jake knocked on the door, Mary let them in. "You don't have to knock around here," Tobe said when they had entered and were taking off their coats. Maddie thought Jake acted embarrassed, but couldn't be sure. He certainly didn't act around Ida the way he did at home. Maybe they weren't as close to getting married as the family thought. Ida seemed strangely quiet, and Jake laughed nervously about anything that was said. They both held the baby and then gave her to Mary to take back to the bedroom. Nettie wasn't strong enough to be up yet, and Maddie felt they should go home. But just as they were preparing to leave, Jake cleared his throat and told them to stay. He had something he wanted to tell them, and he thought they would want to know. Maddie sat down again and looked curiously at Lydia. Giddle winked, and Maddie almost giggled. Tobe smiled and looked out the window, but Jake did not seem to notice and rubbed his hand over and over his leg while Ida twisted her handkerchief into a tight wad. We just wanted you, the family, to know that Ida here," and he jerked his thumb toward her, "and I are planning to get married." All were silent. Jake continued to rub his leg, and Ida untwisted her handkerchief, only to twist it tight again. Suddenly, Tobe burst out laughing. "Well, it's about time." he said in a loud voice so like Father's, it was exactly how he would have reacted. "When are you getting married?" Mary asked. Jake looked up and Ida smiled. "In March, I guess," Jake replied. "Oh," was all Mary said. "Well, that was worth staying for," Maddie announced, straightening her back. "The way Jake and Ida were acting, I thought they were going to tell us they are breaking up." Ida laughed self-consciously, and Maddie wished she could feel more at ease with them. But in time, she was sure, Ida would be just like one of them. "I suppose you'll be Navalhooka," sitting alongside the bridesmaid, Lydia said to Maddie on their ride home. "Nah, it'll be Ola and Giddle and Mary and Harry, probably." "Nope. I'll bet it will be you and Ezra." "Ah, such an imagination," Maddie snorted. "Let's just wait and see," Lydia said. Time passed quickly, with winter blowing into spring. Everyone was busy getting ready for the wedding. Mother pieced a comforter, and she and the girls quilted it in long stitches with crochet thread. Then Mother sorted through her dishes and chose several bowls, a cake plate, and a glass pitcher to give to them. They were family keepsakes. Some of them were passed to her from her mother and grandmother, and some were from Father's mother. It was only fitting that the children should have some of them when they married. Then there was sewing to do. As it turned out, Lydia had been right about Maddie being one of the Navalhooka. She would be with Ezra, Ida's brother, and Mary would be with Harry, Ida's younger brother. So there were new dresses to make, and Mother was making Jake's suit. Not much time was left to get ready, and all the work must be done secretly. No one in the community was to know about it until 2 weeks before the wedding. Then Abe Nisley, the minister, published them by simply announcing that Jake and Ida would be getting married in 2 weeks. Now the work began in earnest. Because of the small community, it would not be a large wedding, as Tobe and Nettie's had been. But in spite of that, there was still lots of work to be done. The day of the wedding was chilly, with a high, silvery sun. Maddie and Mary rode in Jake's buggy to Ida's home and took their places at the front of the room beside Ida. Mary sat to her left, and Harry and Ezra sat on the opposite side next to Jake. After the ceremony, tables were set up in the tiny living room for the reception. Jake and Ida set up housekeeping just across the field from Maddie's family's home in a rented house. Many were the times they walked to each other's homes for the evening, or to borrow a cup of sugar. The summer before, 1922, had been rather dry, and the crops had not produced as usual. But this summer, 1923, was extremely dry. The prairie was practically barren. Father was gloomy much of the time, and Maddie wondered what would happen if it didn't begin to rain. She heard that other men were thinking of moving back to Kansas. Inwardly, she hoped Father would decide to move back too, but at the same time, she did not want him to lose everything he had worked so hard for. She continued her stints as a maid for other people and wondered if that was to be her lot in life. It seemed to be an endless job, what with the many little faces to wash, faces of other mothers' children, and meals to cook, delicious meals for other mothers' families. Would she never have her own little faces to wash and her own family to feed? Would she never have the privilege to rest with her babies in the afternoon as other mothers did? Would she never feel loved and cherished by her husband as these women were cherished? But she was only 20. There were many years left to settle down, she supposed. And yet, sometimes she wondered. End of chapter 15.